Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to week 10 of Recession Rebellion. A bit of news to kick us off, actually. So this week, just to say, we'll be doing these Recession Rebellion webinars today, being Tuesday, as you know, and also on Thursday, and we'll talk more about that shortly. As of next week, though, the format for Recession Rebellion will be changing. So a little bit of sad news. Thursday is the last day that we will have the genius that is Martin Lucas with us. And Martin will talk to us about what he's going to do on Thursday as his last contribution. Martin and I set this webinar series up together 10 weeks ago, and he's somebody that I've worked with and will continue to work with, actually, for over many months and years. And so he leaves the Recession Rebellion wagon in body but not in spirit, I think it's fair to say, this coming Thursday. And then throughout June, they will move to being once a week on a Thursday. There will be longer sessions. They'll be running for an hour, and they will be by pre-registration only. You'll be able to get access to them. So there'll be more information coming out about that on LinkedIn, I think Thursday or Friday of this week, and via our Corporate Punk newsletter as well. There'll be themed webinars on very specific things that have been published well in advance, and you'll be able to register for the ones that are relevant to you. And the reason we're doing that is to just continue to move the format on, really, as well, to make sure that we are doing our best to answer the different questions and needs that we're perceiving in our audience, and also to continue to experiment and continue to bring our very best games. So that's what will be happening. So we'll see you after today. We'll see you on Thursday at 9. There'll be more information on Thursday at 9 about next Thursday's webinar, and they will roll on and be weekly from the 4th of June, from Thursday the 4th of June. So that's the news this morning. Martin, do you want to just quickly talk to us about what you're doing on Thursday?
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of context to it. So I've always lived by the messaging that I picked up from Napoleon Hill. He talked about quantity of service, quality of service, and spirit of service. So my logic for having to stop the Recession Rebellion is that I'm just literally tapped out for time. So I want to live by what I've done. So if I felt that I couldn't continue adding the quality that I needed to do all the preparation to make Recession Rebellion work the way I wanted, then that was the conversation I had with Phil. Or what you might actually find out, and it'll be in the newspaper tomorrow, is I got sacked for unprofessional behaviour, and Phil has just been really kind in this moment.
Martin's in his own rose garden there, you might know, make a statement about how it wasn't his fault at all. He's not apologising. He's not apologising.
I had to drive to the castle because of Recession Rebellion to test my eyesight. That's what happened. Anyway, so what we're going to do on Thursday is what I've been sharing with you week on week is what Gap in the Matrix do, and what I studied for all those years, was about decision-making, right? So it's decision-making on the side of you as an individual. So how can you grow and be the best version of yourself? And on the business side, how can you grow a business if that's what your context and focus is? So on Thursday, we're going to do a very open clinic, meaning that you can come with any questions to do with psychology, to do with your own decision-making, to do with mindset, whether that's business or self. We're going to be very open, so I'm expecting people to come with very difficult, challenging questions, and we can have a lot of fun with it. Thank you, Phil.
Good stuff. Well, listen, today, in the meantime, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about vision and different ways to think through the future. So this particular session today is built on a session that I've been running personally for about 7 or 8 years now, around different ways into cracking organisational vision. I don't have time to go through all of the 9 different ways in this morning that I'll share with you, but I wanted to share with you just a handful that might help you to start thinking through how you vision your future and what you're doing there. So the reason why we're talking about vision this morning, just to bring it back, as I say, we're all about building adaptive organisations at Corporate Punk. And adaptive organisations have a number of key attributes. And the first pillar there being awareness, which is really to do with our sense of self, particularly at an organisational level. Are we clear on what values we inhabit and why? And I talked about that last week. Self-identity, we know who we are. I'll be talking about that in another webinar coming up very soon. I wanted to spend some time today on vision buy-in, which is we're all clear on our long-term goals. So in order to be good at navigating the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or we want to call it navigating the seas of change, or whatever other slightly clumsy metaphor you want to use on a Tuesday morning, got to have that very strong sense of self-awareness underpinning everything, and understand who you are from a self-identity point of view, what your role and purpose in the world is, what values you stand for, which is to say, how do you behave, what do you care about, and ultimately your North Star as well, where is it you're actually going? Because if any of those things aren't intact, you basically just get knocked about by fortune way too much. You lose that kind of really deep connection to the core. You lose a really deep sense of actually, here is who I am, what I'm about, what I'm trying to achieve. So vision's really important in that context. Strategy may change, tactics may change, and goodness knows over the last 10 weeks we talked about that a lot. But actually, where we're trying to get to, what we're trying to manifest in the world, who we're trying to be in that most self-actualized and maybe long-term sense of that word, doesn't really change and shouldn't really change. So that's what vision's all about. And vision buy-in is the consequence of having codified and defined that vision very, very well. Ultimately, vision needs to be felt, not stated. So what I mean by that is, dog-eared posters, the intranet, having some PowerPoint presentation with some nice words written on it, whatever. Those things are, potentially tools for the expression of vision, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your people are going to buy into it, or even quite frankly that you, the leader, will buy into it either. Vision has to connect. It has to connect in that kind of emotional and psychological way, so that all of us feel that sense of buy-in, that sense of engagement to what it is we're trying to achieve, what we're trying to manifest in the world, and what we're trying to become. Vision's also, by the way, got to have some sort of connection to what the organisation does. I mean, WeWork's vision mission was, raising the world's consciousness before, quite rightly, that got laughed out of any kind of credibility at all. And I think for the simple reason that there was just literally no resemblance between what it was professing to do or to bring about, state it was trying to bring about in the world, and the actual core of its business and its business model. So credibility is really, really important in all of this. But in the end, it's got to have that emotional connection, that connection that, we all feel, those of us working for an organization, feel a really deep and embodied sense of when we come in every single day. So how do we get to expressions of vision? You can talk about buy-in, but to be honest with you can only buy into something when it's well expressed in the first place. So what I wanted to share with you today, I'm just going to quickly flip over here into this. I wanted to share with you I'm trying to multitask, not doing it very well. I wanted to share with you different ways into the expression of vision. In order to do this a few years ago, a team that I was leading at the time reviewed a huge number of organizational visions. They spent a huge amount of time looking, not just in the UK, but across the world, at different expressions of organizational vision, and ultimately came to the conclusion that there were 9 expressions of vision. They could be values-led, they could be quantitative, they could be all about the social role, quantitative, I should say, I always struggle with that word. They could be about social role and impact. They could be led on a service promise. They could be led on a category promise. They could be about a role model. They could be about a common enemy being another business or an idea or notion, or they could actually be about internal transformation. So organizations express vision. Ultimately, they sit with the way that they express vision seem to us to sit within one of these 9 buckets. I'm going to share with you over the course of the next 10 or so minutes just 5 of those, the 5 that I consider to be most interesting and potentially relevant actually to the kinds of organizations that we talk to in this forum. And each one, I think, is a different way into thinking through what vision is and what vision can be about. So the first one is about values-led. Now, values-led vision appeals to a deeper need beyond an organization or business. It goes right to the heart of what often led to the founding of that business. And sometimes they can be very progressive. Those visions can give businesses something to grow into. The danger of values-led visions, though, is that ultimately they can, become quite self-serving. They can be a little bit wafty. The WeWork vision to raise the world's consciousness actually was a values-led vision that just lost credibility and was a bit too cynical, can be very woolly and hard to measure, and a bit meaningless. Raising the world's consciousness, you're in property, mate. How does that work? So, but to look at some of these that are quite good in action, Airbnb, to help people feel like they can belong anywhere. So that makes sense, right? I mean, Airbnb, we all have our opinions on that. Well, so we all have their opinions on it. I certainly have my opinions on Airbnb, which will be a surprise to precisely nobody. But there is something there about actually hosts taking in people from around the world, doing their job as hosts, that kind of sense of inclusivity and of belonging that makes total sense that Airbnb will want to stake a claim to that. The interesting thing, of course, is that need for belonging is a deeper human need. It doesn't just exist in the constraints of that particular industry or that particular business model. It actually exists outside of it as well. We talked for years, I did back in my days of being in advertising and marketing, about the brands that are most successful in the world have connect to culture in ways that are outside of their category. And this is an example of that. The idea of belonging, the idea of that then comes with that of perhaps globalization is something that feeds into that, whether we, whatever you feel about globalization, or perhaps that deeper human need that goes to the kind of tribalistic nature that we all have. The fact we're all social creatures, that exists above and beyond any business model. So values-led visions have a habit of doing that. To Nike to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. Again, the idea of Nike's not really a sporting organization in one sense. It's about human performance. It's about the inspiration that we get through seeing people achieving extraordinary things. And so its expression of vision actually talks to those kind of values. So that's the first way in, just to take a value, something that matters deeply to human beings, perhaps, or within your particular cultural frames of reference, and to look at how you connect your organization to that. Interestingly, on the Ford one, to democratize the automobile, I mean, democratization of a value, or democratization as a value, I should say, has been so overused, particularly in .coms over the last sort of 10 to 15 years. It can be quite hard sometimes with values-led visions to actually genuinely carve out something that feels unique and ownable. But anyway, there you go. That's the first way in. The second way in is to actually just think purely quantitatively. Now, there are problems here. Sometimes visions are not really financial targets. One has to be careful. We worked with an organisation last year whose vision was to become a 25 million pound turnover organisation by 2025. Said, that's not a vision, mate, that's a financial target. I think the distinction between a quantitative vision in the end and a financial target or some other kind of goal is, again, the sense to which the sort of quantity encapsulates hopes, dreams, beliefs, aspirations of the individuals concerned. Becoming a 25 million pound business by 2025 spoke to nobody in that organisation. People do not get out of bed to create shareholder value. Never forget that. Yeah. But in these examples, what we're actually seeing here is a slightly deeper, certainly in a couple of them, a slightly deeper belief about what would happen. So Jay-Z to become the first rap billionaire. Fascinating that, because it's not really about the financial target as in and of itself. It's about what that says about Jay-Z's own life story, about his history, his heritage, coming from the very poorest of society and proving that it is possible to achieve exceptional things. That quantitative vision expresses so much more than just a number. The classic, of course, Microsoft, a computer on every desk in every home, wasn't actually just about a target to achieve a certain amount of market penetration. It was actually about the role that computing needs to play, the central role that computing needs to play, or Microsoft believed it needs to play, in the lives of every human being. So it's very tangible, it's very unambiguous. It can be very pleasing to people who are financially focused. But actually, at the same time, we've got to make sure that we get that deeper and embodied senses I've been talking about. And also, what happens after the goal is achieved is something that needs to be thought through here. It'd be interesting to have that conversation with young Jason Zed, wouldn't it? But there you go, maybe one for a different time. That's number 2. Number 3, social role and impact. So this is about visions that are about what it is we actually want to see happen for humanity. These are very popular forms of visions because actually a lot of the time it can feel as though what we're doing as organizations is setting quite worthy goals that feel like they're for the betterment of everybody, not just the betterment of shareholders. Google, perhaps the classic here, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful, which sounds like, well, who wouldn't want that? Well, depends on the business model that underpins it, would be my answer. But nevertheless, a great expression of social role. Volvo, by 2020, no one will ever die in a Volvo. The social role there is all about safety for humanity. And the impact, of course, is vast. Think of the heartache that will be saved by a road system on which nobody ever died. I mean, that would be an extraordinary breakthrough for humanity. And also that particular vision does a great job of underlying certain brand attributes for Volvo about the quality with which they do what they do. So truly loved brands a lot of the time will have this kind of social role and impact, and they can be very good platforms for building really good reputational value. Got to be very careful, though, that we don't arise cynicism again. And again, if you want to stake a claim to having a social role, well, actually making sure that you really live that social role in a very positive way is something that needs to be carefully thought through. Starbucks, to inspire and nurture the human spirit, talking then about one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. One of the challenges that those sorts of businesses face, of course, is actually in their supply chains. How do they make sure that, that the way that they treat the people that make their coffee, for example, or harvest their coffee, perhaps more accurately, are well treated, and organizations like that have become past masters at not screwing the already poorly paid and economically disadvantaged look like an extremely worthy and praiseworthy thing to do. So setting aside that slightly cynical point, but you see what it's driving at, right? The idea of social role and impact being something that we have to be able to demonstrate across the totality of our business if it's something that we are going to lay claim to. So moving on. Jumping number 4 into number 5, which is about category innovation, challenging the received wisdom of how a category should behave. Chose this one for this morning because it sort of tessellates quite nicely with some of the stuff that I've talked about in other webinars about lateral thinking, particularly understanding the core assumptions that underpin any particular category. Category, by the way, here is just a different way of saying industry, and then really, really challenging that at its core. So Uber, to evolve the way the world moves, is fundamentally challenging the received wisdom of how transport should behave. Uber's cycled through multiple visions, by the way. That is just one of them. Simple, which is a US banking brand, which really paved the way for a lot of the brands that we see here in the UK, being Tide or Monzo or any of those other challenges, to reimagine the basics of banking and make managing your personal finances effortless. Nobody would have looked at banking in the 80s, 90s, noughties and said that managing personal finance was effortless. A lot of the time we're still overly reliant on branch networks. Still very difficult these days to even pay a check-in, for example, has become still a whole thing. Not that anybody's using checks anymore, but even 5 years ago they were, and there was no convenient way of doing that. And of course, the way that, a bit like in business finance, the way that balances are displayed aren't actually that helpful for a lot of people because it doesn't help you with budgeting, which Simple did back in the day, still does now, and a lot of the other banks have taken from. So understanding what the core underlying behaviors, values of a category are, setting a vision to set out and challenge those can be really useful, particularly if you're a disruptive or category challenging business. It can be a good way of being famous as well, because you're actually picking a fight. The whole challenger thing is basically be David to the incumbent's Goliath. So it can be a really useful way of doing that, and good to build communications around as well. It can, of course, become very self-serving if you're not careful. Businesses just exist to break the rules, don't tend to be that interesting. And of course, the thing about innovation is, well, what is innovative today becomes normal tomorrow. So what do you do when that innovative standard has been satisfied is something that needs thinking through, which points to a broader question about vision. You know, I mentioned vision's there to be a North Star. Well, perhaps another thing to think about is over what time scale. And are we comfortable with a vision that will set out we need to do over a relatively short time scale, perhaps a few years, or do we want to set something out which actually outlasts us and becomes the basis for a real legacy to be created in the business? Just something maybe to have a think about there. Moving on then. Common enemy, idea or notion being the next one. I think we've got one more after this. No, this is the last one. Sorry, there you go. Yes, common enemy, idea or notion being the last one I want to talk about this morning. So this is all about, actually, is there a rallying societal or reputational issue that we want to tackle? So Sony, for example, set out to tackle the worldwide poor image of Japanese products back in the day, and made that its vision. It wanted to become the gold standard or the new standard, so that when people thought about Japanese products, they actually thought better of them. And you can see why that would be something that would elevate Sony's reputation in its own country as well. What a huge role for it to play in the economic health and the reputational health of its broader populace. So, you know, that's the kind of thing. Oxfam, it stands against poverty, to create a just world without poverty. You know, that's what it's an idea or a notion that it stands against. So, you know, it can be very, very motivating, gives people something to work against, can feel ultimately like CSR, but perhaps a bit less anodyne than the usual sort of greenwashy kind of stuff. And if you can rally people around it, because ultimately, you know, the idea of combating a specific idea or notion, having that as an enemy also speaks to the value systems, and maybe people that you want as customers or people that you want as, you know, to work with or whatever, can be quite charity focused. If you're not careful, can be something that feels, again, quite worthy. If the enemy gets defeated, well, what's the point of you would be another valid question. I would also say that we have to be very careful sometimes in abstract ideas or notions. I mean, wars on drugs are notoriously hard to win, partly because what they do is they make very abstract and intangible the particular enemy in question, and therefore make it much harder to wrestle with and to combat. So, you know, we've got to think about that. But those are just some different ways in to thinking about organizational vision. So one thing you should do now then, maybe take an hour out of your day. I'm always a great fan of taking an hour a week just to implement some of the stuff we teach you on Recession Rebellion. Revisit the vision for your business if you have one. And just maybe apply one of those 5 ways in, and then look at what its implications might be for you. If you don't have a vision already, maybe pick one of those different ways in and look at the implications for your business if you were to embrace that vision. In the end, as I said earlier on, it's a very felt thing, this. So it's about, do I connect with it emotionally? Can my people connect with it emotionally? And can that be something that we can remain connected to emotionally, regardless of what the world throws at us? Martin, over to you for some questions.
Sorry, Phil, my Zoom decided to freeze when I was trying to unmute myself. Wonderful session this morning, Phil, as ever. Lots of gold within there. First question. So great statement about vision from Phil. We hear a lot about being authentic these days, which I embrace, but can't help but wonder, were most businesses not leading from an authentic state of mind before? So this aspect needs to be emphasized so much now. Any thoughts about what life was like before, and whether people need to be more authentic now, and what the challenges are around it? Quite a general, open one about authenticity.
Pretty general question. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with assertions like most businesses weren't being authentic. I think it's too generalizing to be useful. What I would say is that I think we've seen a trend over the last 10, 20 years, probably driven by digital media, which is that businesses have become very porous. So, you know, their bad behavior, if they do indeed choose to behave badly, it becomes harder and harder to try and contain. You know, will leak out, it will get out on Twitter, or you know, customers will film something and, you know, it can go viral or whatever else. And as a result of that, I think there is an increasing pressure to walk it as you talk it. And I think the very best brands in the world, though, have always been completely congruent in that respect, how they run their businesses, and what they stand for. They've not tried to separate those two things out. And the idea of brand management as being fundamentally something that you do is distinct from how you manage yourself and your own behaviour, I think has really been killed off by the porousness of most organisations that's been enabled by digital media.
Cool, wonderful. What's the benefit of having a vision? Like, what's the actual upside for a business?
You know where you're going. And, a really good vision gives you that sort of sense of, what is it I'm getting out to achieve? What am I getting out of bed to achieve in the morning? What is it I'm working towards? I think all of us need purpose in life, right? And I think vision is a really important part of the expression of purpose. And I think also, when things get tough, I have a very strong vision for what I'm trying to do in my own business. And, there are tough times with that. There are times when things go well and things don't go well. And, but having that North Star, at least then I've got something to walk in the direction of, and it gives me the belief in the end, I guess, that however tough things get, there's always a destination worth getting to.
Wonderful. And what's the best way to measure the impact if you're looking to test out and try your new vision and all the actions and behaviors that come through it? So how would you measure the impact of it?
Well, I think vision is an interesting thing to try and measure the impact of. You can certainly measure the buy-in to vision as part of a program of cultural measurement, broader conversation that we have time for today. I think in terms of measuring the hard commercial impact of it, it's difficult to map that to pounds, shillings, and pence on the balance sheet in the short term. What I would say is that organisations without vision, organisations where people don't know why they're coming into work every morning and aren't in service of something that may be, bigger or greater than they are, I would say that those organisations, in my experience, are ones that they tend to see lower levels of productivity from their people. And their people will tend to be asking questions like, what are we doing here? And why are we doing it? And do we have a coherent strategy? And what is our strategy in service of? And all of that tends to sap productivity. So I would say over the years, it's very hard to measure because you can't really hypothecate the presence of a vision to pounds, shillings, and pence. But what I can say is that the more compelling a vision an organisation has, the more it's generally able to, the more productive it's generally able to be.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, that brings us to a wrap for today, Phil. So as Phil and I were speaking about, on Thursday, we're doing both sides of growth for self and growth for your business. So looking at science, psychology, whatever you want. So a very open clinic that we're going to do. But as ever, you can catch this on YouTube, and wonderful session, Phil. Thank you.
Total pleasure. So we'll see you on Thursday, and we'll talk more on Thursday about what's going to happen in June, those weekly sessions now that we're moving to. Get your questions ready for Martin on Thursday. We'll look forward very much to that. And in the meantime, as always, all liking and sharing of this content, gratefully appreciated, and we look forward to seeing you later on.